A Democratic Education by Mitchell L. Holley, read by Susan Castleman. This is an independent audio recording read from The Classical Teacher by Memoria Press, Summer 2025. Modern society will not maintain democracy, that oft bandied but seldom understood idea, at the ballot box, but in the classroom. As a moral and intellectual achievement, democracy still demands that the polity do more than vote. People must be taught to think deeply, patiently, and well. At the height of the Republic, Roman politicians encouraged citizens to cast votes and advocate for important social issues, but they also understood that democracy first required individual virtue and reason developed in that long labor of self-governance. Democracy is not sustained by the machinery of elections, but by the formation of free-thinking souls, that is, by education. A truly democratic education must form free people, not in the sense of untethered or untraditioned individuals, but in the classical sense of persons capable of self-government. This type of education trains students in reason, virtue, and prudence. If it is to mean more than the tyranny of popular whims, democracy must be founded on the ability of each citizen to first govern himself before he seeks to govern others. And here lies the great irony of our age. While modern education waves the banner of democracy, it often produces the very opposite of what it proclaims. Children are untutored in logic, unmoored from history, and increasingly ruled by emotion rather than reason. Modern education flatters their autonomy, but fails to furnish the inner architecture of freedom. As it turns out, the most democratic education is not the most modern, but the most classical. It is an education in liberty, rightly understood as the freedom to do what one ought, not as the freedom to do what one wants. In the end, democracy is not sustained by procedures, but by free persons. Rather than starting with standardized benchmarks or marketable skills, classical education begins with the human person. It asks first, what kind of soul must a child possess to live in liberty and serve the common good? And then, what kind of mind is needed to discern truth from error or mere opinion? And what kind of heart must be cultivated to desire what is noble, even when it is difficult? To answer these questions, a democratic education turns not to trends, but to the rich tradition of learning found in the trivium and quadrivium, in which students move naturally from the beauty of language, grammar, to the clarity of thought, logic, to the power of expression, rhetoric. They memorize poetry, read and discuss great literature, parse Latin verbs, study formal logic, and learn to speak and write with precision and grace. Students encounter the idea of quantity in its pure and applied forms when they study arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy. Through these disciplines, they see the order and wonder of the world extending throughout the cosmos. This type of education is not ornamental, nor is it a luxury. It orders the mind, shapes the soul, and orients the heart toward wisdom. It's an education that both informs the intellect and forms the person. Students who study Latin gain more than vocabulary. They learn precision, patience, and endurance. They also encounter a civilization whose words and ideas still shape law, science, politics, theology, and every other domain of Western civilization. Students who read ancient classics like Homer's Iliad or Virgil's Aeneid are doing more than simply gathering historical facts. They are witnessing virtue and vice acted out on the stage of history. In wrestling with Euclid, they learn the discipline of reason. In reading Shakespeare and the superlative classics of Western society, they are challenged and transformed by the moral imagination of the ages. Students who have been shaped by this kind of democratic education are unlikely to be deceived by false agendas and punditry because they have studied the fallacies of logic. They are hard to manipulate because they have trained their memory and attention on enduring truths and truly good things. They judge difficult issues fairly, write clearly, and speak graciously. After long dialogues with Cicero, Sophocles, Augustine, and others, students understand what human greatness has looked like in the past, and they desire to meet that standard themselves in the present. Classical education creates this kind of student, and democracy relies upon this type of citizen. The American founders could imagine our democratic republic precisely because they were educated in the ideas that undergird it. They read the works of Roman orators like Cato, studied Roman law and Greek philosophy, and were steeped in the language of virtue and liberty. Thomas Jefferson could quote Horace from memory and was a student of Epicurus. John Adams loved the political work of Cicero and was rumored to have carried Plutarch's Lives in his saddlebags. Alexander Hamilton often quoted admiringly from the Greek historians in the Federalist Papers. And when James Madison discussed the necessity of a strong central government during the Constitutional Convention, he cited the Greek federations from the 4th century BC as examples. Like the Amphictyonic Leagues, Madison warned, the American project might also fail without a strong and unified federal system. These were not mere academic ostentations to the founding fathers. The classical authors provided the trellis on which the vines of American democracy are grown. This traditional model of education, the same one the founders received, has not vanished completely. And the revival of classical education today is not a nostalgic enterprise, but a necessary one. Schools across the country are rekindling this vision. They offer not just an alternative to modern education, but a recovery of what education once was and what our republic still needs. Democracy depends on more than mass participation. It depends on the moral and intellectual virtues of its participants. A society that forgets this principle, as Rome did many years ago, will find that the forms of freedom have outlived their substance. Rome still held sham elections long after the Republic was dead, and the emperors still minted coins bearing the word libertas, even as liberty itself vanished into oblivion. Like Rome, a nation may still hold elections and praise liberty while its people, untrained in reason and unformed in virtue, are tossed about by impulse, susceptible to demagogues, and weary of the responsibilities that freedom entails. The classical tradition offers a vision of education rooted in truth, goodness, and beauty, in logic and language, in memory and imagination. This ancient, perennially relevant tradition dares to believe that children are not problems to be managed or consumers to be placated, but incarnate souls to be formed. And a classical education does not reserve the best things for a few. Indeed, it makes the best things accessible to any child. And by doing so, it prepares people to be citizens, men and women capable of liberty, because they have been trained in self-rule. This type of training does not begin in the halls of Congress, but around the kitchen table, in the schoolroom, and in the quiet labor of teachers and parents. It begins with a return to the classical tradition out of which our republic grew. In short, it begins with a democratic education.